At the Blackwell Industries annual gala, my husband Nathan's hand cracked across my face with such force that my champagne glass shattered against the marble floor. In the stunned silence that followed, I looked up from where I'd fallen and smiled, tasting blood on my expensive lipstick. The collective gasp from Boston's corporate elite seemed to hang in the air like suspended time. "You just made the biggest mistake of your career, Nathan," I said softly, my voice carrying in the perfect acoustics of the Four Seasons ballroom. Nathan stood over me, his initial rage quickly morphing into confusion as he processed my unexpected reaction. A woman who's just been publicly assaulted doesn't typically smile through bloody lips. But I wasn't just any woman. And this wasn't a moment of humiliation, it was the culmination of 2 years of meticulous planning. Across the ballroom, though Olivia Pearson stood watching, her champagne glass frozen midway to her lips. I caught her eye as I dabbed at my split lip, and something passed between us: recognition, resolve, and the cold, calculated fury of a woman who had survived her own battles. There were 3 things Nathan Mitchell didn't know that night. First, that I wasn't just his trophy wife, Sarah Evans, but Sarah Blackwell, granddaughter of Blackwell Industries' founding family. Second, that I'd been documenting his financial crimes and workplace harassment for the past 2 years, building an airtight case that would send him to prison. And third, that Olivia Pearson had survived her own abusive marriage and had sworn she'd never let another woman suffer what she had endured. But let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about one slap. It's about how a moment of violence became the catalyst that brought down a man who thought he was untouchable. 3 years ago, I was living what everyone assumed was a perfect life. I was Sarah Morrison then, at least. That's who Nathan thought I was. My decision to use my mother's maiden name began in college, a choice born from a desire to escape the weight of the Blackwell legacy and discover who I truly was without the family name opening doors. Growing up as a Blackwell meant never knowing if people valued you or your inheritance. Every friendship seemed tinged with calculation. Every romantic interest potentially motivated by dollar signs rather than genuine connection. By 18, I was exhausted by the constant scrutiny and second-guessing that came with being the granddaughter of Thomas Blackwell, founder of one of Boston's most prestigious corporations. So I disappeared. Not literally, but effectively. Sarah Blackwell took a sabbatical from public life, while Sarah Morrison enrolled at Harvard with a carefully constructed background, middle-class parents from Springfield, Massachusetts, a father who ran a modestly successful tech company, a life comfortable enough to explain my polished manners, but not so privileged as to raise eyebrows. The freedom was intoxicating. I lived in regular dormitories and took part-time classes and dated boys who had no idea my trust fund could have purchased their family homes 10 times over. For once, I was judged solely on my own merits, my intelligence, my character, my choices. When I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in business and accounting, the achievements were entirely my own. While Sarah Morrison built a respectable professional reputation, Sarah Blackwell quietly completed her master's degree in forensic accounting at MIT. My dual identity wasn't initially planned as a long-term strategy. It was meant to be a temporary reprieve from the Blackwell spotlight. But the freedom it offered was too valuable to relinquish. So I maintained both personas with the help of our family lawyers and an elaborate system of trusts and shell companies that obscured the connection between my two selves. Nathan Mitchell entered my life during my 5th year of this double existence. He was Senior Vice President of Operations at Blackwell Industries, a rising star in the corporate world with a reputation for driving results and ambitious expansion strategies. We met at a charity gala where I was representing a nonprofit that my father's tech company supposedly supported. Nathan was charming, articulate, and moved through Boston's elite social circles with practiced ease. What I didn't realize initially was that Nathan's interest in me wasn't romantic, it was strategic. He'd researched my background thoroughly and determined that my father's tech company could provide useful connections for his career advancement. He wasn't trying to marry up. He thought he was marrying across, gaining access to a network that could help him climb the corporate ladder at Blackwell Industries. The irony was exquisite. Nathan had spent months courting me because he thought I could help his career at Blackwell Industries, never realizing that I didn't just have connections to the company, I practically owned it. Our wedding was featured in Boston Magazine as a power couple merger, with Nathan positioned as the rising corporate star who'd married the brilliant daughter of tech entrepreneur Michael Morrison. The article included a photo of us dancing at our reception in the Four Seasons, the same ballroom where he would later slap me in front of 300 witnesses. Even the venue held a certain poetic justice. As Mrs. Nathan Mitchell, I played my role perfectly. I attended corporate wives' luncheons, where women discussed their husbands' careers with the intensity of military strategists. I organized charity fundraisers that raised impressive amounts for worthy causes while networking with Boston's social elite. I decorated our Beacon Hill penthouse with expensive art and hosted dinner parties that advanced Nathan's professional relationships. To everyone who knew us, I was the ideal corporate wife, beautiful, intelligent enough to hold conversations with executives, but not so ambitious as to overshadow my husband's career. I attended company events where I smiled graciously and deflected personal questions with practiced ease. When people asked about my background, I gave them carefully rehearsed stories about growing up in Springfield and working my way through Harvard on scholarships. The performance was so convincing that even Nathan's colleagues at Blackwell Industries, people who worked directly with the Sarah Blackwell Trust Fund and board positions, never made the connection. They saw a middle-class woman who'd married well, not the granddaughter of their company's founder, quietly observing their operations from the inside. The first red flag came 3 months into our marriage. Nathan returned from a board meeting at Blackwell Industries in a rage, throwing his briefcase across our Beacon Hill penthouse and screaming about incompetent executives who don't understand real business. When I suggested he might want to discuss his frustrations more constructively, he grabbed my wrist so tightly it left bruises and told me to stick to planning charity luncheons and leave business to people with actual brains. That night, as I covered the bruises with concealer, I made a decision that would change everything. I began investigating my own husband. Usad, you have to understand, Nathan had no idea who I really was. To him, Sarah Morrison was just another pretty Harvard graduate from a moderately wealthy family. He'd married me because I looked good on his arm at corporate events and because he thought my father's modest tech company might provide useful connections. He had no clue that the woman serving him coffee each morning was worth more than he'd ever see in his lifetime, or that I had a master's degree in forensic accounting from MIT that I'd kept carefully hidden. The investigation started small. I noticed discrepancies in financial documents Nathan carelessly left around our home, purchase orders that didn't match delivery receipts, vendor contracts with companies that seemed to exist only on paper, budget allocations for projects that were mysteriously canceled after payments had been processed. As someone who'd spent her summers working in Blackwell Industries' audit department under my real name, in a different division where Nathan had never worked, I recognized the patterns immediately. Nathan was systematically embezzling from Blackwell Industries, and he was doing it with the kind of sophisticated financial manipulation that suggested he'd been planning this for years. But the financial crimes were only the beginning. As I dug deeper, using resources and connections Nathan didn't know I had, I discovered something far more disturbing. Nathan had been using his position to create a hostile work environment for female employees, particularly those who were young, attractive, and financially vulnerable. He'd offer career advancement in exchange for private meetings. He'd make working conditions so uncomfortable for women who refused his advances that they'd quit rather than file complaints. And for those brave enough to consider speaking up, he'd remind them that he had the power to destroy their careers with a single phone call. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that Nathan Mitchell wasn't just a criminal, he was a predator who used his corporate position to abuse women who couldn't fight back. That's when I learned about Olivia Pearson, the CEO who had taken over Blackwell Industries just 6 months before I married Nathan. Olivia was a legend in the corporate world, known for her brilliant strategic mind and her zero-tolerance policy for harassment and discrimination. What wasn't widely known was her personal history information I discovered through my family connections that Nathan had never bothered to research. Olivia had built her career while trapped in an abusive marriage to Gregory Pearson, a powerful attorney who had systematically isolated her from friends and family while taking credit for her professional achievements. For 15 years, she'd endured psychological, financial, and physical abuse while building one of the most successful consulting firms in New England. When she finally found the courage to leave, Gregory had tried to destroy her professionally, using his legal connections to spread rumors about her competence and mental stability. The divorce had been brutal, fought in courtrooms and boardrooms across Massachusetts, but Olivia had survived. And more than that, she'd thrived. She'd sold her consulting firm for over $200 million and used that fortune to acquire controlling interest in several companies, including Blackwell Industries. And she'd made it her personal mission to ensure that no woman under her leadership would ever face what she had endured. This was the woman who would be watching from across the ballroom 2 years later when Nathan made the biggest mistake of his life. But before we get to that moment, you need to understand how carefully I planned for it. Because what happened at the Blackwell Industries Gala wasn't an accident. It was the culmination of 2 years of methodical preparation, strategic positioning, and patient planning. I knew that Nathan's arrogance would eventually be his downfall. Men like him always believe they're smarter than everyone around them, especially women. I knew that if I gave him enough rope, he'd hang himself. I just had to make sure I was ready to capture every moment when he did. The annual company gala was perfect for my purposes. Every executive, board member, and major client would be there. The event would be photographed and filmed for the company's annual report. Most importantly, Olivia Pearson would be there, along with the board of directors who would need to act swiftly on any information I provided them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The real story begins with how I spent those 2 years becoming someone Nathan never suspected I could be, not just his wife, but his judge, jury, and the architect of his complete destruction. The morning after I discovered the first suspicious financial documents, I sat in my home office at 5:00 a.m., drinking coffee and staring at a blank legal pad. I had the motivation and the resources to bring Nathan down, but I needed a plan that would ensure complete justice not just for his crimes against Blackwell Industries, but for every woman he'd victimized along the way. My first call was to Marcus Cooper, a private investigator who specialized in corporate fraud cases. Marcus had worked with the Blackwell family before, handling sensitive matters that required absolute discretion and ironclad results. When I explained what I needed, his response was immediate. "Mrs. Morrison, he said, using the name I'd given him, if what you're describing is accurate, we're looking at multiple felonies spanning several years. This isn't just an employment matter, it's a criminal enterprise." "That's exactly what I'm hoping to prove," I replied. "But I need evidence that will hold up in court, in boardrooms, and in the media. I need this to be so comprehensive that there's no possibility of him slipping through legal loopholes or buying his way out of consequences." Within a week, Marcus had assembled a team that read like something from a corporate thriller, forensic accountants who could trace financial irregularities through the most sophisticated shell company structures, digital investigators who could recover deleted emails and encrypted communications, employment law specialists who understood exactly how to document workplace harassment in ways that would satisfy both civil and criminal courts. But the most valuable member of our team was Jessica Bennett, Olivia Pearson's younger sister, who worked as a victim advocacy specialist. Jessica had developed methods for helping harassment victims document their experiences in ways that protected them legally while building powerful cases against their abusers. "The key," Jessica explained during our first strategy meeting, "is reaching out to his previous victims in a way that empowers them rather than re-traumatizing them. Many of these women have been convinced that they were the problem, or that speaking up will destroy their careers. We need to show them that they have allies and that their voices matter." The investigation unfolded in phases over 18 months. Phase 1 involved financial analysis, tracking Nathan's embezzlement through layers of fraudulent contracts and phantom vendors. This was where my forensic accounting background proved invaluable. I could review Blackwell Industries' financial records with the expertise of someone who understood both legitimate business practices and sophisticated fraud schemes. What we discovered was breathtaking in its scope. Nathan had been systematically diverting company funds for almost 4 years, using a network of shell companies that existed solely to process fake invoices, equipment purchases that were never delivered, consulting fees paid to companies that provided no services, travel expenses for trips that never happened. He'd stolen nearly $2.3 million from Blackwell Industries while maintaining his reputation as a rising corporate star. Phase 2 focused on the harassment victims. Jessica developed a careful outreach strategy that respected these women's privacy while encouraging them to share their experiences. We discovered that Nathan's pattern went back even further than I'd initially suspected, to his previous job at a smaller firm in Providence, where 3 women had left under suspicious circumstances. The victim interviews revealed a sophisticated manipulation strategy. Nathan would target women who were professionally competent but financially vulnerable, recent graduates with student loans, single mothers supporting families, women from modest backgrounds who couldn't afford extended unemployment. He'd use their economic insecurity against them, making it clear that resistance would result in career destruction. Phase 3 involved building connections with other executives who had concerns about Nathan's behavior, but had been afraid to speak up individually. Marcus conducted careful interviews with current and former Blackwell Industries employees, documenting a pattern of intimidation that extended beyond sexual harassment to include general workplace bullying and professional sabotage. Throughout this investigation, I maintained my perfect facade as the supportive corporate wife. I attended company events where I smiled and made small talk with the same executives my private investigators were interviewing. I hosted dinner parties where Nathan's colleagues shared their concerns about company morale, never suspecting that their observations were being carefully documented by the woman serving them wine. The most challenging aspect was living with Nathan while building the case against him. Every morning, I made him coffee and kissed him goodbye as he left to commit the crimes I was documenting. Every evening, I listened to him complain about difficult employees and unreasonable expectations, while knowing that he was describing his victims and accountability measures. But the investigation also revealed something that made maintaining my cover easier: Nathan's complete lack of respect for my intelligence. He never questioned why I asked thoughtful questions about his work, because he assumed I was too simple to understand the implications of his answers. He never worried about leaving documents around our home because he believed I lacked the business acumen to recognize their significance. His dismissive attitude toward my capabilities became one of my greatest advantages. While he saw a decorative wife who admired his success, I was systematically building the most comprehensive corporate fraud case in Massachusetts history. By the time we reached the final phase of the investigation, I had enough evidence to send Nathan to prison for 20 years, financial records proving embezzlement, testimony from 8 harassment victims, documentation of workplace retaliation, and evidence of tax fraud that would trigger federal prosecution. But I wanted more than just criminal conviction. I wanted complete professional destruction, public humiliation, and a very clear message to every other executive who thought they could abuse their power without consequences. That's when I began planning for the Blackwell Industries annual gala, the perfect stage for Nathan's final performance as a respected corporate executive. The key moment that crystallized my resolve came 18 months before the gala, when Nathan came home early from what he claimed was a late board meeting. I was in our home office reviewing Blackwell Industries' quarterly reports on my secure laptop, the one Nathan didn't know existed. As I heard his footsteps approaching, I quickly minimized the windows and opened a Pinterest page about kitchen remodeling, transforming myself back into the domestic goddess he expected to find. "How was your day, darling?" I asked, turning to greet him with the bright smile I'd perfected over our marriage. Something was different about his expression. He looked satisfied in a way that made my skin crawl. "Productive," he said, loosening his tie with the kind of casual arrogance I'd learned to recognize as dangerous. "Very productive. We finally got rid of some dead weight in the accounting department." I kept my voice light and interested, the way Sarah Morrison would respond to office gossip. Anyone I've met at company events, Nathan poured himself a scotch from the crystal decanter his mother had given us as a wedding gift, taking his time as if savoring a private joke. "Rachel Harrison, Remember her cute little brunette from the Christmas party? Always wore those conservative dresses that made her look like a librarian. I remembered Rachel perfectly. She was 26, a brilliant forensic accountant who'd graduated top of her class from Boston University. She'd been hired specifically to modernize Blackwell Industries' internal audit systems. And from what I'd observed at company events, she was exactly the kind of meticulous professional the company needed. She seemed lovely, I said carefully. What happened? Nathan's smile was predatory. Let's just say she wasn't a good cultural fit. Some people can't handle the collaborative environment we've built in our department. The way he said collaborative made my stomach turn, but I maintained my innocent expression and waited for him to continue. She kept asking questions about vendor relationships, questioning perfectly standard business practices, acting like she was some kind of detective instead of just doing the job she was hired for. He took a long sip of his scotch. So we had to make some adjustments. You fired her, we gave her an opportunity to resign, made it clear that her future in this industry depended on her ability to be a team player. Nathan's voice carried the casual cruelty of someone discussing the weather. Amazing how quickly people can reassess their career priorities when they understand the consequences of being difficult. That's when I knew. The sick feeling in my stomach crystallized into absolute certainty that Nathan wasn't just incompetent or casually sexist. He was systematically using his position to abuse women who threatened his authority. I excused myself to the bathroom, claiming I needed to freshen up before dinner. Instead, I used my secure phone to access Blackwell Industries' HR database. What I found there made my blood run cold. Rachel Harrison had indeed resigned that afternoon, but her resignation letter, which I could access through the board member portal, told a very different story than Nathan's casual dismissal. She documented months of harassment, intimidation, and professional sabotage. She described being excluded from important meetings, having her reports dismissed without review, and receiving increasingly aggressive confrontations about her attitude problem. Most damning of all, she documented 3 separate instances where Nathan had cornered her in empty conference rooms and made it clear that her job security depended on her willingness to provide additional services beyond her professional duties. Rachel's letter ended with a paragraph that haunted me. I cannot continue to work in an environment where reporting financial irregularities results in sexual harassment and professional retaliation. I have attempted to address these concerns through proper channels, but it has become clear that Mr. Mitchell's position in the company hierarchy provides him with immunity from accountability. I am resigning to protect my own safety and career prospects, but I fear for the women who will face these same choices after me. I sat on the bathroom floor, reading and rereading her words as the full scope of Nathan's behavior became clear. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was a pattern. And as a board member with access to company records, I had the power and responsibility to investigate further. Over the next 2 weeks, I conducted a careful review of HR records, exit interviews, and departmental turnover rates. What I discovered was a systematic pattern of brilliant young women being hired into Nathan's department, then leaving within 6 to 12 months with resignation letters that cited cultural fit issues or career pivots. But when I cross-referenced these departures with private investigation reports I commissioned, the real story emerged. Nathan had been targeting women who posed professional threats, those smart enough to detect the financial irregularities he was hiding, or ambitious enough to challenge his authority. He'd use a combination of sexual harassment, professional sabotage, and economic intimidation to force them out before they could expose his crimes. Rachel Harrison had been the latest victim, but she wouldn't be the last unless someone with real power intervened. That night and on, as I watched Nathan sleep peacefully beside me, completely unaware that his wife now knew exactly what kind of monster he was, I made a decision that would define the next 18 months of my life. I was going to destroy him methodically, systematically, and completely. But first, I was going to document every crime, every abuse, and every manipulation so thoroughly that when the reckoning came, there would be no possibility of escape, no room for doubt, and no chance of him ever hurting another woman again. The investigation that began with Rachel Harrison's resignation letter would end with Nathan Mitchell's complete professional annihilation. And the perfect venue for that destruction would be the Blackwell Industries annual gala, where his violence would be witnessed by everyone who mattered. Justice, I'd learned, was a dish best served in public. The plan I developed was elegant in its simplicity: create a situation where Nathan's true character would be revealed in front of the people whose opinions mattered most to his career, while ensuring that his violent reaction would be witnessed by someone with both the power and personal motivation to deliver immediate justice. All I had to do was wait for Nathan to be himself. And as history would prove, I didn't have to wait very long. The 18 months I spent building my case against Nathan while maintaining my facade as his devoted wife were like living in a carefully choreographed performance where one wrong step could bring down the entire production. Every day required me to be two different people: Sarah Morrison, the loving spouse who supported her husband's career ambitions, and Sarah Blackwell, the board member systematically documenting his crimes. My mornings began at 5:00 a.m. with secure phone calls to my investigation team, reviewing surveillance reports and financial evidence while Nathan slept peacefully beside me. By the time he woke up, I'd already received updates on his previous day's activities, analyzed new evidence of his embezzlement schemes, and coordinated with victim advocacy specialists who were helping his harassment targets build their cases. But when Nathan opened his eyes, he saw only the woman he expected: Sarah Morrison, already dressed for the gym, with his coffee prepared exactly the way he liked it and the Wall Street Journal folded beside his breakfast plate. "Good morning, darling," I'd say, kissing his cheek with the same warm affection I'd shown since our honeymoon. "How did you sleep?" The performance required constant vigilance. I had to remember which version of myself was supposed to know what information. Sarah Morrison could ask innocent questions about Nathan's workday because she was interested in her husband's career. Sarah Blackwell already knew the answers because she received detailed reports about all senior executive activities. The most surreal moments came during company social events, where I'd find myself in conversations with the very people my investigators had been interviewing. At the spring charity gala, I spent 20 minutes chatting with Jackson Bailey, who worked in HR, about his concerns regarding departmental turnover rates, never letting on that I'd commissioned a detailed analysis of those same statistics. "It's troubling," Jackson confided over champagne, clearly needing someone to share his professional concerns with. "We've lost some really talented women from operations over the past 2 years. Exit interviews all cite similar issues with management style and workplace culture." I nodded sympathetically, playing the role of the concerned spouse. "That does sound worrying. Have you been able to identify any patterns?" "Well," Jackson glanced around nervously. "It seems concentrated in one particular department, but the executive in charge has such strong performance metrics that it's hard to raise concerns without concrete evidence." What Jackson didn't know was that I had that concrete evidence sitting in a secure server, organized into neat categories with timestamps and corroborating documentation. But Sarah Morrison could only offer supportive platitudes, while Sarah Blackwell made mental notes about Jackson's potential value as a witness. The dinner parties Nathan and I hosted became particularly challenging exercises in compartmentalization. I'd serve elaborate meals to executives who were unknowingly dining with the primary target of an ongoing fraud investigation, while making sure the conversation flowed smoothly and everyone felt comfortable enough to share their professional observations. During one memorable evening, Sebastian Thompson, Nathan's mentor and former colleague, spent an hour describing his concerns about irregularities he'd noticed in vendor payment processing. His detailed observations would later become crucial evidence in proving the systematic nature of Nathan's embezzlement. "The thing is," Sebastian said, lowering his voice as he accepted another glass of the expensive wine Nathan insisted on serving, "the pattern is too consistent to be accidental. Someone with sophisticated knowledge of our financial systems is manipulating the approval process." Nathan, sitting across the table, raised his glass in a mock toast. "Always the conspiracy theorist. Sebastian, sometimes inefficiency is just inefficiency." I watched this exchange with fascination. seeing Nathan's casual dismissal of Sebastian's concerns as both arrogance and a telling defensive reaction. Later that night, I'd relay Sebastian's observations to my forensic accounting team, who confirmed that his suspicions were not only accurate but understated in scope. The psychological toll of maintaining the double life was considerable. I was constantly surrounded by evidence of Nathan's crimes while pretending to admire his professional achievements. When he received promotions or recognition awards, I had to celebrate his success while knowing it was built on fraud and harassment. When he complained about difficult employees or unreasonable demands, I had to offer sympathy while documenting his admissions of workplace abuse. The most difficult moments came when Nathan would come home and casually mention firing or transferring women who had refused his advances. He'd frame these decisions as necessary management actions, never realizing that his own wife was recording his explanations and passing them along to employment law specialists. We had to let Will's new hire go. He mentioned one evening over dinner, referring to Will Bennett, Olivia's nephew who worked in the finance department. Lisa something, nice enough girl, but she wasn't adapting well to our collaborative culture. I knew from my team's research that Lisa something was Lisa Thompson, Rachel's younger sister, who had specifically requested a transfer to Nathan's department to investigate what had happened to her sibling. Her failure to adapt had actually been her refusal to ignore the financial irregularities she'd discovered and her resistance to Nathan's increasingly aggressive advances. That's unfortunate, I replied, cutting my steak with steady hands while mentally adding this conversation to the growing file of evidence. She seemed promising when you hired her. Sometimes you can't tell about people until they're under pressure, Nathan said with the casual dismissiveness I'd learned to recognize as his way of justifying cruelty. Some people just aren't cut out for high-stakes corporate environments. What he meant, of course, was that some people weren't willing to accept sexual harassment and financial fraud as normal business practices, but Sarah Morrison could only nod sympathetically, while Sarah Blackwell documented another admission of discriminatory employment practices. The investigation files grew week by week, stored on encrypted servers that Nathan couldn't access even if he'd known to look for them financial records, victim testimonies, recorded conversations, photographic evidence, every piece carefully cataloged and cross-referenced to build an unassailable case. But perhaps the most valuable evidence came from Nathan himself, through the casual admissions and unguarded comments he made in the privacy of our home. He had no reason to filter his thoughts around me because he saw me as an extension of himself rather than an independent person with her own moral compass. Those 18 months taught me that the most dangerous criminals are often the most careless ones, not because they lack intelligence, but because their arrogance blinds them to the possibility that someone they consider powerless might actually hold all the cards. And as the Blackwell Industries annual gala approached, I was ready to show Nathan exactly who had been holding the cards all along. The Blackwell Industries annual gala wasn't just the company's most prestigious social event, it was a strategic masterpiece of corporate theater where board members, executives, major clients, and media representatives gathered to celebrate another year of success. For my purposes, it was the perfect venue to ensure Nathan's downfall would be witnessed by everyone whose opinion could destroy his career permanently. The planning began 6 months in advance, with me using my board member privileges to influence key decisions about the event. As Sarah Blackwell, I had legitimate input on guest lists, venue selection, and program scheduling. As Sarah Morrison, I could enthusiastically support my husband's excitement about the company's biggest networking opportunity of the year. I've been asked to give a presentation about our operational efficiency improvements, Nathan announced one evening in February, practically glowing with pride. Olivia specifically requested that I highlight the cost-saving measures we've implemented in my department. I smiled warmly, playing the supportive wife, while internally noting the delicious irony. Olivia Pearson had indeed requested Nathan's presentation, but only because I'd suggested it during a board meeting, knowing that giving him a prominent platform would amplify his eventual humiliation. "That's wonderful, darling," I replied, refilling his wine glass. It sounds like a perfect opportunity to showcase your leadership style to the entire company. What Nathan didn't realize was that his operational efficiency improvements were largely the result of forcing out competent female employees and replacing them with less qualified candidates who wouldn't question his fraudulent activities. His presentation would essentially be a confession delivered to an audience that included several of his victims and the investigators building cases against him. The guest list required careful orchestration. Through my board position, I ensured that specific people would be in attendance. Rachel Harrison, who had accepted my personal invitation to join us as a consulting expert on accounting practices. Sebastian Thompson, whose suspicions about financial irregularities could provide real-time validation of evidence. And most importantly, Matthew Wilson from the Boston Business Journal, who had been quietly researching corporate harassment patterns and would recognize the significance of what he was about to witness. But the most crucial element was ensuring Olivia Pearson would be positioned to see everything clearly. During our board meetings, I'd carefully studied her reactions to discussions about workplace harassment and employee protection policies. Olivia's responses revealed someone with deep personal investment in these issues, someone who would react decisively when confronted with evidence of abuse. I arranged for Olivia and me to be seated at adjacent tables with clear sight lines to the area where Nathan would be networking before his presentation. The ballroom layout of the Four Seasons provided perfect acoustics for conversations to carry across the space, ensuring that whatever happened would be clearly audible to key witnesses. The timing required precise coordination with my investigation team. Marcus had positioned discreet surveillance equipment throughout the venue, disguised as standard event photography and security systems. Every conversation, every interaction, every moment of the evening would be documented with broadcast-quality evidence that could be used in both civil and criminal proceedings. But the most delicate aspect of the trap was creating the circumstances that would trigger Nathan's violent reaction. Through 18 months of careful observation, I'd identified his specific triggers, challenges to his authority, public questioning of his competence, and most dangerously, any suggestion that women around him possessed superior knowledge or capabilities. My plan was elegantly simple. I would attend the gala as Sarah Morrison, the supportive corporate wife. But at the crucial moment, I would reveal myself as Sarah Blackwell, the board member who had been investigating his crimes. The shock of discovering that his simple wife was actually his professional superior would trigger exactly the kind of violent reaction I needed to ensure his immediate termination and criminal prosecution. The weeks leading up to the gala were spent in final preparations. My legal team had prepared comprehensive documentation packages that could be delivered to law enforcement, regulatory agencies, and media outlets within minutes of receiving my signal. Victim advocates had prepared statements from Nathan's harassment targets, ready to be released once the initial evidence went public. I practiced my revelation speech until every word was perfect, every pause calculated for maximum impact. The transformation from Sarah Morrison to Sarah Blackwell had to be seamless and undeniable, backed by concrete evidence that would leave no room for doubt or denial. The most challenging part was maintaining my facade as the event approached. Nathan's excitement about his upcoming presentation was infectious, and he spent hours practicing his speech about operational improvements and leadership excellence. Watching him rehearse lies about his professional achievements while planning his complete destruction required every ounce of emotional control I possessed. "You're going to be brilliant," I told him the night before the gala, helping him choose between two nearly identical ties. "Everyone will see exactly what kind of leader you really are." The irony was so perfect, it almost made me laugh. Nathan would indeed show everyone exactly what kind of leader he was, just not in the way he anticipated. The final element of the trap was psychological preparation. I spent the morning of the gala in meditation and strategic visualization, mentally rehearsing every possible scenario and my responses to each outcome. By the time I put on my custom Valentino gown armor, disguised as elegance, I was completely calm and absolutely ready. Nathan Mitchell had spent 4 years building his reputation through fraud, harassment, and manipulation. In a few hours, I would tear it down completely. using nothing but the truth delivered at exactly the right moment to exactly the right audience. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for Nathan to walk into it. The evening of the gala, I stood before my bedroom mirror, applying the final touches of makeup with the precision of a warrior preparing for battle. The reflection staring back at me was Sarah Morrison, elegant, supportive, perfectly groomed corporate wife. But underneath the designer gown and flawless cosmetics was Sarah Blackwell, armed with enough evidence to topple an empire. Nathan emerged from his dressing room in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo, looking every inch the successful executive he believed himself to be. He'd spent the afternoon rehearsing his presentation one final time, polishing the lies he planned to tell about his departmental improvements and leadership innovations. "You look stunning," he said, fastening his cufflinks with the confidence of a man who had no idea his world was about to end. "Tonight is going to be perfect." "Yes," I replied, touching the diamond necklace at my throat, a family heirloom that had belonged to the original Blackwell matriarch, my great-grandmother, who had helped build the company Nathan was systematically destroying. "I have a feeling it will be a night no one will forget." The ride to the Four Seasons was filled with Nathan's excited chatter about the evening's networking opportunities and the impression his presentation would make on the board. I listened with practiced interest while mentally reviewing the positioning strategy my team had confirmed that afternoon. Marcus and his surveillance team were already in place, disguised as event photographers and security personnel. Jessica Bennett had positioned herself among the victim advocates who would be monitoring the evening for signs of harassment, a presence that would provide immediate support for anyone who needed it. Most importantly, Olivia Pearson's assistant had confirmed that Olivia would arrive precisely at 7:30, giving her time to observe the pre-dinner networking before Nathan's scheduled presentation. As our car pulled up to the hotel's elegant entrance, I saw familiar faces already making their way into the ballroom. Board members, department heads, major clients, everyone whose opinion could make or break an executive's career was gathering in one room. The guest list read like a who's who of Boston's corporate elite, making it the perfect audience for Nathan's public destruction. "Remember," Nathan said as we approached the ballroom doors, "tonight is about showcasing our success as a power couple. Your job is to be charming and supportive while I handle the serious business conversations." His casual dismissal of my capabilities would have been infuriating if I hadn't known it was about to backfire spectacularly. Nathan had spent 3 years treating me like an attractive accessory, never suspecting that the woman he was patronizing controlled his professional fate. The ballroom was spectacular, with crystal chandeliers casting warm light over arrangements of white orchids and elegant round tables draped in Blackwell Industries' signature navy blue. A string quartet provided subtle background music while servers circulated with champagne and artfully arranged canapes. The setting was perfect for corporate networking and corporate destruction. I immediately spotted the key players positioned exactly as planned. Olivia Pearson stood near the silent auction display, her commanding presence drawing respectful attention from nearby executives. Her silver hair was styled in an elegant chignon, and her navy blue dress projected both authority and approachability. She was the perfect witness, someone with the power to act decisively and the personal motivation to do so immediately. Rachel Harrison was stationed near the registration table, ostensibly helping with guest check-in, but actually positioned to observe Nathan's interactions with female colleagues. Her presence served multiple purposes: as a witness to any inappropriate behavior, as validation for other women who might be experiencing similar treatment, and as a psychological trigger for Nathan, whose guilt about her forced resignation might provoke exactly the kind of defensive reaction I needed. The media representatives were strategically distributed throughout the room, their cameras and recording equipment disguised as standard event documentation. Matthew Wilson from the Boston Business Journal had positioned himself with clear sight lines to the area where Nathan would be networking, while the Blackwell Industries corporate photographer was actually one of Marcus's team members, ensuring professional quality documentation of every moment. Nathan immediately launched into his networking routine, moving from group to group with the practiced ease of someone who thrived on corporate social dynamics. I watched him work the room, collecting compliments on his upcoming presentation and basking in the attention of colleagues who had no idea they were praising a criminal. Nathan Sebastian Thompson called from across the room, approaching with a warm smile that barely concealed his professional concerns. Looking forward to your presentation tonight. I'm particularly interested in hearing about those vendor cost reductions you've been implementing. I saw Nathan's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, the first sign of stress in response to Sebastian's pointed interest in the very area where his fraud was most concentrated. But he recovered quickly, falling back on the charm and deflection tactics that had served him well for years. Always the detail man, Sebastian, Nathan replied with practiced joviality. I think you'll find our efficiency improvements speak for themselves. What Nathan didn't realize was that Sebastian's seemingly casual questions were actually carefully coordinated inquiries designed to elicit specific responses that would later be used as evidence. Every answer Nathan gave was being recorded and would be compared against the financial records my team had assembled. As I moved through the room beside Nathan, playing my role as the devoted spouse, I carefully monitored the positioning of all key participants. Olivia Pearson was now in conversation with board members, but her attention kept drifting toward our area of the room. Rachel Harrison had moved closer to the bar where she could observe without seeming intrusive. The journalists were documenting everything with the thoroughness of people who sensed a major story developing. The stage was set perfectly. In less than an hour, Nathan would deliver his presentation full of lies and self-congratulation, and immediately afterward, I would transform from Sarah Morrison into Sarah Blackwell and watch his entire world collapse in real time. But first, I needed to trigger the reaction that would seal his fate permanently. The cocktail hour was a masterclass in corporate theater, with Nathan playing his role as the rising executive to perfection. He moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone who believed he was destined for greatness, collecting compliments and building connections with the skill of a natural politician. Sarah, darling, called Patricia Westbrook, the wife of Blackwell Industries' largest institutional client, as she glided toward us with champagne flute in hand. You look absolutely radiant tonight. That gown is exquisite. Thank you, Patricia, I replied with practiced warmth, accepting the air kisses that were standard currency at these events. Nathan was just telling me how excited he is about his presentation tonight. Nathan beamed with the satisfaction of someone whose ego was being fed exactly the attention it craved. Around us, executives and their spouses formed the kind of networking clusters that define Boston's corporate social scene, carefully orchestrated conversations where business was conducted through social pleasantries. I understand you're presenting on operational efficiency, said Will Bennett, Olivia's nephew, approaching our group with genuine professional interest. The finance department has been impressed with the cost reductions coming out of your division. I watched Nathan's expression carefully as Will mentioned the finance department. There was a flicker of something anxiety, defensiveness, before he recovered his smooth corporate demeanor. We've implemented some innovative approaches to vendor management and resource allocation, Nathan replied, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who had delivered this explanation many times. Sometimes you have to challenge conventional thinking to achieve breakthrough results. What Nathan was describing as innovative approaches were actually sophisticated embezzlement schemes, and his breakthrough results came from stealing company money while forcing out the employees who might have detected his crimes. But to the gathered executives, his words sounded like exactly the kind of forward-thinking leadership they valued. Innovation is certainly important. Olivia Pearson's voice cut through the conversation as she joined our circle, her presence immediately commanding attention from everyone nearby. Though I've always believed that sustainable efficiency requires strong ethical foundations, the comment seemed innocuous enough to casual observers, but I caught the subtle emphasis Olivia placed on ethical foundations and the way her eyes assessed Nathan's reaction. She was testing him, perhaps responding to concerns that had been raised through official channels, or simply exercising the kind of strategic awareness that had made her one of Boston's most successful CEOs. Nathan's response revealed everything about his character. Instead of engaging with Olivia's point about ethics, He deflected with the kind of corporate speak that sounds impressive but says nothing. Absolutely, Olivia, he said, maintaining eye contact with practiced sincerity. Our department has always prioritized stakeholder value optimization while maintaining compliance with all relevant regulatory frameworks. It was a perfectly crafted non-answer that avoided any actual commitment to ethical behavior while using enough business terminology to sound authoritative. But Olivia Pearson hadn't become a CEO by accepting empty corporate rhetoric. I'm particularly interested in stakeholder value, she continued, her tone remaining pleasant while her words carried unmistakable weight, especially when it comes to our employee stakeholders. Retention and satisfaction metrics can be such valuable indicators of leadership effectiveness. Nathan's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Employee retention was exactly the area where his department showed the most concerning patterns, talented women leaving at alarming rates, exit interviews citing cultural fit issues, and persistent rumors about hostile working conditions. We've maintained very strong performance metrics, Nathan said, his voice taking on a slightly defensive edge that only someone who knew him well would recognize. Of course, not every employee is suited for high-performance environments. Interesting perspective, Olivia replied, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp with assessment. In my experience, high-performance environments are usually characterized by their ability to develop talent rather than drive it away. The conversation was becoming increasingly tense, with Nathan clearly struggling to defend his management approach without admitting to the systematic harassment and intimidation that defined his leadership style. Around us, other executives were beginning to take notice of the exchange, sensing the kind of professional conflict that could signal important shifts in corporate hierarchy. I could see the exact moment when Nathan realized that his casual dismissal of employee concerns wasn't playing well with his CEO. His jaw clenched slightly, and his hand moved to his tie in the nervous gesture I'd learned to recognize as a warning sign. Perhaps, Nathan said, his voice carrying a hint of the aggression he usually reserved for subordinates. We should focus on measurable business outcomes rather than subjective employee feedback. The comment was a mistake, a subtle but unmistakable challenge to Olivia's leadership philosophy delivered in front of witnesses who would remember every word. Olivia's expression didn't change, but I saw something shift in her eyes, a cooling that suggested Nathan had just crossed a line he didn't even know existed. Measurable outcomes are indeed important. Olivia replied with the kind of controlled precision that preceded corporate executions, which is why I've been reviewing departmental performance data so thoroughly. Nathan went pale. If Olivia had been reviewing departmental performance data, she would have seen the financial irregularities, the turnover patterns, and the HR complaints that my investigation had uncovered. His crimes weren't just documented in my private files, they were visible in the official company records that Olivia had every right to examine. The networking hour was supposed to be Nathan's moment of triumph, his opportunity to showcase his achievements before delivering the presentation that would cement his reputation as a rising star. Instead, it was becoming the opening act of his professional destruction, played out in front of the very people whose opinions would determine his future. As the dinner chimes sounded and guests began moving toward their assigned tables, I knew that Nathan's confidence was already beginning to crack. The man who had entered the ballroom, convinced of his own brilliance, was now facing the possibility that his CEO had discovered his crimes. But the real performance was just beginning. As we moved toward the dinner tables, I could see Nathan's carefully constructed confidence beginning to fracture. Olivia's pointed questions about employee retention had rattled him more than he wanted to admit, and his usual smooth networking persona was showing hairline cracks that would soon become gaping fissures. The seating arrangement I had orchestrated months earlier placed us at a premium table near the front of the ballroom, with clear sight lines to Olivia's table and optimal acoustics for ensuring our conversation would carry to key witnesses. Nathan saw it as recognition of his status. I saw it as the perfect stage for his downfall. "You handled that well," I told him as we settled into our seats, knowing that praise would help rebuild his ego and make him more likely to display his true character when provoked again. Olivia obviously respects your business acumen. Nathan straightened his shoulders, accepting the compliment as validation. She's just doing her due diligence. Any good CEO questions operational strategies, especially when they're as innovative as ours. The table filled with other executives and their spouses, creating the kind of intimate dinner conversation environment where corporate hierarchies relaxed slightly and people revealed more of their authentic personalities. For most attendees, this was a chance to build personal connections with professional colleagues. For me, it was an opportunity to gather final evidence while positioning Nathan for his fatal mistake. "Nathan," called Jackson Bailey from across the table, raising his wine glass in a friendly gesture. "I have to say the efficiency improvements in operations have been impressive from an HR perspective. Though I have to admit, the turnover patterns have been interesting to analyze." I felt Nathan tense beside me as Jackson brought up the exact issue that revealed the systematic nature of his harassment campaign. The turnover patterns Jackson referenced were the carefully documented trail of brilliant women leaving Nathan's department after refusing his advances. "Turnover is natural in high-performance environments," Nathan replied, his voice carrying the first hint of the dismissive arrogance that would ultimately destroy him. "We maintain very high standards for cultural fit and professional excellence." "Cultural fit," repeated Sebastian Thompson thoughtfully from his position at the adjacent table. Having clearly overheard the conversation, "That's an interesting metric. In my experience, the best corporate cultures are usually the most inclusive ones." Nathan's face flushed slightly, whether from wine or rising anger. I couldn't tell, but his response revealed the toxic mindset that had driven his behavior for years. "Inclusion is important," he said, his voice taking on the condescending tone I recognize as dangerous. "But so is maintaining standards. Some people simply aren't equipped for the demands of senior-level corporate environments. Some people," Olivia Pearson's voice cut through the ambient dinner conversation like a blade. She had clearly been listening from her nearby table, and her question carried the weight of someone who had heard similar dismissive language before. Nathan turned to face Olivia, seemingly unaware that every word he spoke was being recorded by multiple devices and witnessed by people whose opinions would determine his professional future. "Well," Nathan said, his voice gaining confidence as he fell back on the toxic beliefs that had guided his management style, "certain demographic groups tend to be more emotionally reactive to standard business pressures. They interpret normal workplace dynamics as personal attacks." The silence that followed his comment was deafening. Around us, conversations stopped as executives processed what Nathan had just said. He had essentially admitted to sex-based discrimination while simultaneously dismissing his victims' legitimate complaints as emotional overreactions. Olivia Roberts stood up slowly, her movement causing a ripple of attention throughout the ballroom. When she spoke, her voice carried the kind of authority that could end careers with a single sentence. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her tone deadly calm, "are you suggesting that women employees are inherently less capable of handling workplace pressure than their male colleagues?" Nathan had walked directly into the trap I had spent months constructing. His arrogance and deep-seated prejudices had driven him to make explicitly discriminatory statements in front of witnesses, creating the kind of legal liability that would make his termination not just justified, but legally necessary. But instead of recognizing the danger he was in, Nathan doubled down on his toxic beliefs. "I'm simply acknowledging reality," he said, his voice rising with the kind of defensive aggression that preceded his most violent outbursts. "Some people are better suited for leadership roles than others. It's not discrimination, it's objective assessment of capabilities." I watched Olivia's face transform from professional disapproval to personal recognition. This wasn't just about corporate policy violations anymore. Nathan's words had triggered something deeper, more personal. He was embodying every dismissive, condescending attitude that had been used to undermine women's professional achievements throughout corporate history. "Objective assessment," Olivia repeated, her voice carrying years of suppressed fury. Based on what criteria? Exactly, Nathan's response would be the final nail in his professional coffin. But he was too blinded by arrogance to see the executioner's axe falling. based on performance under pressure, and he said, gesturing broadly with his wine glass, based on the ability to make hard decisions without getting emotional, based on understanding that business isn't about feelings, it's about results. The irony was perfect. Nathan was describing emotional decision-making while becoming increasingly emotional himself. He was talking about pressure performance while cracking under the pressure of Olivia's questions. He was dismissing women's capabilities while being systematically dismantled by the most powerful woman in the room. But he still hadn't realized that his wife, the woman he considered his inferior in every meaningful way, was orchestrating his destruction. That revelation was coming next. Nathan's discriminatory comments had created exactly the atmosphere of tension and moral outrage I needed for the final phase of my plan. The ballroom buzzed with uncomfortable murmurs as executives processed what they'd just witnessed, a senior manager essentially admitting to systematic gender-based discrimination in front of the CEO and 300 witnesses. But Nathan, intoxicated by wine and his own sense of righteousness, seemed oblivious to the damage he had already inflicted on his career. Instead of backing down or attempting damage control, he leaned into his toxic beliefs with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. "Olivia," he said, rising from his chair with the theatrical gesture of someone who believed he was making a powerful point, "I think we need to be honest about the realities of corporate leadership. Not everyone is cut out for the demands of executive responsibility." Olivia Pearson remained standing, her posture radiating the kind of controlled fury that preceded devastating corporate retribution. Around us, phones had quietly emerged as guests began documenting what was clearly becoming a career-ending meltdown. "Please continue," Olivia said, her voice deceptively calm. "I'm fascinated by your perspective on leadership qualifications." Nathan misread her tone completely, interpreting her measured response as professional interest rather than the rope she was giving him to hang himself with. "Leadership requires decisive action," Nathan declared, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "It requires the ability to make tough personnel decisions without being swayed by emotion or political correctness. Sometimes that means removing people who don't fit the culture, regardless of their demographic characteristics." The final phrase was delivered with barely concealed contempt, making it clear that Nathan's tough personnel decisions were based on prejudice rather than performance. But he was so caught up in his own rhetoric that he failed to notice the horrified expressions surrounding him. That's when I decided it was time to begin my transformation from Sarah Morrison to Sarah Blackwell. "Fascinating perspective, darling," I said, my voice taking on a tone that Nathan had never heard from me before: cool, analytical, professionally detached. Though I have to wonder how that leadership philosophy aligns with Blackwell Industries' stated commitment to equal opportunity employment. Nathan turned toward me with surprise, clearly not expecting his wife to engage with the conversation on a policy level. But what he saw in my expression should have warned him that something fundamental had changed. "Sarah," he said with the patronizing tone he used whenever I ventured opinions about business matters, "this is a complex discussion about corporate strategy. Why don't you why don't I what?" I interrupted, standing to face him directly. "Stay quiet while you explain how you've been systematically discriminating against female employees. Or perhaps you'd prefer I remain silent while you describe the tough personnel decisions that have driven 8 women out of your department in the past 2 years." The specificity of my knowledge visibly shook Nathan. Sarah Morrison wasn't supposed to know detailed employment statistics or have insights into departmental personnel patterns. But Sarah Blackwell had access to all company records and had been analyzing those patterns for months. "How do you," Nathan began, then stopped, confusion clouding his features as he tried to reconcile his wife's unexpected expertise with his understanding of her capabilities. "How do I know about the systematic harassment complaints that have been filed against you?" I continued, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. "How do I know about the financial irregularities in your vendor contracts? How do I know about the embezzlement scheme you've been running through phantom consulting fees?" Each accusation hit Nathan like a physical blow, and I watched his face cycle through confusion, denial, in growing panic as he realized that somehow, impossible as it seemed, his wife knew everything about his crimes. "You're talking nonsense," he stammered, his composure finally cracking completely. "You don't understand business operations. You're just what, Nathan?" I asked, taking a step closer to him while maintaining eye contact. "Just a woman whose emotional reactions you can dismiss. Just a wife whose opinions don't matter. Just someone whose intelligence you've consistently underestimated for 3 years." The transformation was happening exactly as I'd planned. Nathan was watching his understanding of reality collapse as the woman he'd considered intellectually inferior demonstrated knowledge and authority that shouldn't have been possible. But his response to cognitive dissonance had always been violence. "Stop this," he hissed, grabbing my arm within a force to leave bruises. "I don't know what game you think you're playing, but you're embarrassing yourself and this company." Olivia Pearson took a step forward, her CEO instincts recognizing the signs of an escalating situation. Around us, security personnel began moving closer, though they remained unobtrusive. "Let go of me, though." "Nathan," I said calmly, making no effort to pull away from his grip. "Unless you'd like to add assault charges to the fraud and harassment allegations you're already facing." "Charges?" Nathan's voice cracked with disbelief. "What charges? You're my wife, not some corporate investigator." I smiled then, the same enigmatic expression that would confuse him so much when he'd slap me, because Nathan Mitchell was about to discover that his wife was exactly the corporate investigator he feared most. "Actually, Nathan," I said, my voice carrying the authority of someone who had been planning this moment for months, "I'm both." And that's when I delivered the revelation that would destroy everything he thought he knew about his life, his marriage, and his future. The moment had finally arrived. 3 years of careful planning, 18 months of systematic evidence gathering, and months of strategic positioning all culminated in this single instant when I would strip away every illusion Nathan had about who held the real power in our relationship. "Nathan," I said, my voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who had been born into corporate leadership, "I'd like you to meet your wife properly. My name is Sarah Blackwell, as in Blackwell Industries." The words hit the ballroom like a thunderclap. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. Even the servers paused in their duties as 300 of Boston's most powerful business leaders processed what they'd just heard. Nathan's grip on my arm loosened as his brain struggled to make sense of what I'd said. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his eyes darting between my face and Olivia Pearson's, as if seeking confirmation that this was some kind of elaborate joke. "That's impossible," he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your name is Sarah Morrison. I've seen your birth certificate, your college transcripts. Morrison is my mother's maiden name," I explained calmly, reaching into my small evening clutch to withdraw my phone. "The identity I've been using since college to protect my privacy and assess people's true motivations. It's amazing what you can learn about someone when they don't know you have power over them." I turned my phone screen toward him, displaying the Blackwell Industries board portal with my verified credentials. The photo was unmistakably me, but wearing the confident expression of someone who controlled corporate empires, rather than the submissive smile he was accustomed to seeing. "Sarah M. Blackwell," I read aloud, ensuring every person in the ballroom could hear. "Board member, trust administrator, and granddaughter of Thomas Blackwell, founder of Blackwell Industries. Current oversight responsibilities include executive performance review, fraud prevention, and employee protection initiatives." Nathan staggered backward as if I'd physically struck him. Around us, phones were appearing as guests began documenting this unprecedented corporate drama. The clicking of cameras provided a steady rhythm to accompany Nathan's complete psychological collapse. "You've been watching me," he said, horror dawning in his eyes as he began to understand the scope of his situation. "All this time, you've been documenting everything. Every fraudulent contract, every harassment incident, Every discriminatory action you have taken, I confirmed. 2 years of evidence. Nathan, enough to send you to prison for 20 years and ensure you never work in corporate America again. Olivia Pearson stepped forward, her expression combining professional authority with personal satisfaction. Mr. Mitchell, I believe you are beginning to understand the gravity of your situation. You haven't just committed crimes against Blackwell Industries, you've been confessing them to a board member while assaulting her in front of witnesses. The reality of his position was finally penetrating Nathan's arrogance-clouded mind. He wasn't just facing professional consequences, he was looking at criminal charges, civil liability, and complete social destruction. And the wife he'd dismissed as intellectually inferior had orchestrated it all. But Nathan's response to feeling powerless had always been violence. His hand came up fast, aimed at my face with the same casual brutality he'd used to control me for years. But this time, instead of cowering or trying to de-escalate, I stood perfectly still and smiled. The slap connected with a sound that echoed across the silent ballroom like a gunshot. The force sent me staggering backward, my champagne glass shattering against the marble floor as blood bloomed across my lip. But instead of the cowering victim Nathan expected to see, I straightened slowly, touched my split lip, and began to laugh, a sound of pure triumph that carried across the horrified silence of the ballroom. "Perfect," I said, dabbing at the blood with a white linen napkin while maintaining eye contact with Olivia Pearson. Absolutely perfect timing. Nathan's face went from flushed with anger to pale with dawning horror as he realized what he'd just done. In front of 300 witnesses, multiple cameras, and his own CEO, he had physically assaulted a board member of the company. The sound of his career ending was almost audible. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. "You've just witnessed the leadership style that Nathan Mitchell has been using to manage female employees for the past 4 years. The only difference is that this time, his victim has the power to ensure there are consequences." Olivia Pearson moved forward with the decisive stride of someone who had been waiting her entire career for this moment. "Security," she called, her voice cutting through the stunned atmosphere. "Please detain Mr. Mitchell pending police arrival." "Now wait just a minute," Nathan began, his voice cracking with desperation as security guards approached from multiple directions. "This is a private marital dispute. Sarah is obviously having some kind of breakdown." "Sarah Blackwell," I corrected, pulling out a second phone, my secure device that contained 2 years of meticulously gathered evidence. "And this isn't a breakdown. Nathan, this is justice." I turned to address the crowd directly, my voice taking on the authoritative tone I'd perfected in boardrooms across 3 continents. "For the past 18 months, I've been conducting a comprehensive investigation into financial fraud, workplace harassment, and criminal misconduct within Blackwell Industries. What you witnessed tonight was the final piece of evidence I needed to ensure complete prosecution." The ballroom erupted in whispered conversations as phones appeared and guests began frantically researching and recording. The story of Nathan Mitchell's assault on a Blackwell family board member would be trending on social media within minutes. "The evidence package," I continued, scrolling through files on my phone, "includes detailed documentation of $3 million in embezzled funds, testimony from 8 harassment victims, recordings of discriminatory statements, and video evidence of workplace intimidation, all of which has been shared with federal prosecutors, the SEC, and the Boston Globe." Nathan's face went ashen as he realized the scope of his exposure. This wasn't just a career setback, it was complete annihilation, engineered by the woman he had considered his intellectual inferior. "You can't do this," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "We're married. You can't testify against me." I smiled, tasting blood but feeling only satisfaction. "Actually, Nathan, spousal privilege doesn't apply to crimes committed against third parties. And since you've been embezzling from my family's company and harassing my employees, I can absolutely testify against you." Olivia Pearson stepped closer, her expression combining professional authority with personal vindication. "Mr. Mitchell, you're terminated immediately for cause. Security will escort you from the premises, and you'll be hearing from our legal department regarding criminal and civil proceedings." "This is insane," Nathan said desperately, looking around the room for support that would never come. "Olivia, you can't seriously believe—" "I believe the evidence," Olivia cut him off sharply, "and I believe what I just witnessed with my own eyes. You physically assaulted a board member after making explicitly discriminatory statements about female employees. That's not just grounds for termination, it's grounds for criminal prosecution." As security guards moved to flank Nathan, I delivered the final revelation that would ensure his complete destruction. "Oh, and Nathan," I said, my voice carrying the sweet satisfaction of long-awaited justice, "that presentation you were so excited to give tonight, the one about your innovative operational improvements, I took the liberty of having our forensic accounting team review those efficiency metrics you're so proud of." I held up a thick folder that had been waiting in my evening clutch all night. "Every cost reduction you plan to brag about tonight corresponds directly to money you stole or women you forced out of the company. Your entire presentation would have been a detailed confession delivered to the people responsible for prosecuting you." The folder hit the marble floor with a sound like a gavel falling, scattering financial documents across the ballroom in a symbolic representation of Nathan's demolished empire. As security led him away, Nathan looked back at me one last time, his expression a mixture of rage, disbelief, and the dawning realization that I had orchestrated his complete destruction. The man who had built his career on intimidating women had finally encountered one he couldn't control, and the look in his eyes told me he finally understood just how badly he had underestimated me. The ballroom doors closed behind him with the finality of a prison cell. The hours following Nathan's removal passed in a blur of police interviews, evidence documentation, and the systematic dismantling of everything he had built through fraud and intimidation, while guests gradually departed from the gala, sharing whispered accounts of what they'd witnessed. I found myself at the center of the most satisfying investigation briefing of my career. Detective Lisa Bennett, Jessica's colleague who had arrived within minutes of the assault, led a team of investigators who treated the ballroom like a crime scene. Every surface Nathan had touched, every conversation Howard had, every document in his possession was being cataloged as evidence in what would become one of Boston's most comprehensive corporate fraud cases. "Mrs. Blackwell, Ben," Detective Bennett said, using my real name with the respect I'd been denied for 3 years. "The evidence package you've provided is extraordinary. We've never seen such detailed documentation of systematic corporate crime. The files Marcus and I had assembled over 18 months were spread across multiple tables, organized into neat categories that told the complete story of Nathan's criminal enterprise, financial records proving embezzlement, audio recordings of harassment incidents, testimony from 8 victims, and photographic evidence of intimidation tactics. Every piece meticulously documented and legally admissible. The federal prosecutors are particularly interested in the civil rights violations." Detective Bennett continued, "Using corporate authority to systematically discriminate against female employees creates federal liability that carries significant prison time." Olivia Pearson, who had remained at the hotel to coordinate with law enforcement, approached with the satisfied expression of someone who had just eliminated a major threat to her company's integrity. "The board met an emergency session," she announced. "Nathan's employment has been terminated for cause, his benefits forfeited, and all company assets frozen pending investigation. We've also voted to implement new oversight procedures to prevent this kind of abuse in the future." What Olivia didn't mention, what she didn't need to say, was that Nathan's assault had been the perfect justification for actions the board had wanted to take for months. My evidence had given them legal cover to destroy him completely while protecting the company from liability. "The media response has been swift," said Matthew Wilson from the Boston Business Journal, who had transitioned from wedding guest to journalist as the story unfolded. "This is going to be front-page news across New England. The combination of domestic violence, corporate fraud, and systematic harassment makes it a perfect storm of public interest. By morning, Nathan's name would be synonymous with corporate corruption and workplace abuse. His LinkedIn profile would be deleted, his professional certifications revoked, and his industry contacts permanently severed. The man who had built his identity around corporate success would become a cautionary tale about the consequences of unchecked power. "What about criminal charges?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the evidence we'd assembled. "Multiple felonies," Detective Bennett confirmed. "Embezzlement, fraud, assault, civil rights violations, and tax evasion. We're looking at 20 to 25 years in federal prison, plus civil restitution that will bankrupt him completely." The mathematical precision of justice was beautiful. Every crime Nathan had committed, every woman he had victimized, every dollar he had stolen would be accounted for in his sentencing. There would be no plea deals, no reduced charges, no wealthy family connections to soften the consequences. "He'll never work in corporate America again," Olivia added with obvious satisfaction. "We've already contacted industry associations and major employers. His professional reputation is finished." As the investigation team packed up their evidence and prepared to leave, I realized that the transformation was complete. Sarah Morrison, the submissive corporate wife, had ceased to exist. Sarah Blackwell, the board member who had brought down a criminal empire, was the only identity that mattered now. Nathan Mitchell had spent 3 years underestimating the woman he thought he controlled. In return, she had given him exactly what he deserved: complete and irreversible destruction, delivered with the precision of someone who understood that true power lies not in intimidation, but in patience, preparation, and perfect execution. Justice had been served, and it tasted even sweeter than I had imagined. The aftermath of Nathan's assault unfolded with the swift precision of a corporate execution. Security guards flanked him on either side while Olivia Pearson coordinated with hotel management and law enforcement with the efficiency of someone who had clearly prepared for this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Olivia announced to the gathering, her voice carrying the authority of someone completely in control of the situation. "While we address this serious matter, please continue enjoying the evening. Blackwell Industries' commitment to our employees and stakeholders remains unwavering." But the real drama was happening in the ripple effects spreading throughout the ballroom as Nathan's professional network began their immediate and brutal abandonment. Executives who had been laughing at his jokes an hour earlier now avoided eye contact, calculating their own exposure and liability. "I never really trusted his numbers," I heard Sebastian Thompson whisper urgently to a fellow board member. "Those vendor cost reductions always seem too good to be true." "The HR complaints make sense now," replied Jackson Bailey, pulling out his phone to presumably contact the legal department. "We've been getting concerning reports about his management style for months." Nathan watched in real time as his career disintegrated. Each whispered conversation another nail in his professional coffin. The man who had entered the gala as a rising corporate star was now a pariah being escorted from the building by security guards. "Sarah, please," Nathan said desperately as the guards prepared to remove him. "We can work this out privately. You don't understand what you're doing to our future." "Our future," I interrupted, my voice carrying across the ballroom with crystalline clarity. "Nathan, the only future you need to worry about involves federal prosecutors and prison sentences. Our marriage ended the moment you showed me who you really are." Olivia Pearson stepped forward, her expression combining professional duty with personal satisfaction. "Mr. Mitchell, in addition to your immediate termination, Blackwell Industries will be pursuing full criminal and civil prosecution for embezzlement, fraud, and assault. Our legal team will also be cooperating with federal investigators regarding your harassment of female employees." The corporate machinery of destruction was already in motion. I could see executives making discreet phone calls, undoubtedly alerting their own companies about Nathan's crimes to prevent association damage. The man who had built his career on networking and relationships was watching those same networks systematically exclude him. "This is impossible," Nathan said, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Olivia, We've worked together for years. You know my value to this company. Your value? Olivia's laugh was sharp and unforgiving. Mr. Mitchell, you've stolen $2.3 million from this company while creating a hostile work environment that's driven away some of our best talent. Your value has been negative for years. Rachel Harrison approached from across the room, her presence adding another layer of validation to the unfolding justice. She no longer looked like the intimidated victim who had been forced to resign. She looked like a professional ready to testify. Ms. Blackwell, Rachel said, addressing me with the respect due a board member rather than the dismissal she'd received from Nathan. I want you to know that several of us are prepared to provide testimony regarding Mr. Mitchell's misconduct. We've been waiting for someone with the power to hold him accountable. Nathan's face went gray as he realized that his victims weren't just going to remain silent, they were actively participating in his prosecution. The intimidation tactics that had kept them quiet were useless against women who now had the protection of the company's board and CEO. The FBI will want to interview all of you. I told Rachel loud enough for Nathan to hear. The federal charges for embezzlement and civil rights violations carry significant prison sentences. As security prepared to escort Nathan from the ballroom, he made one final desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of his career. "You'll regret this," he said to me, his voice carrying the same threatening tone he'd used to intimidate employees. "I know things about this company, about the board." "What you know," Olivia Pearson cut him off with deadly precision, "is how to commit crimes and abuse women, and now everyone else knows it too." The ballroom doors closed behind Nathan Mitchell with the finality of a prison cell. 6 months later, I stood in the corner office that had once belonged to Nathan Mitchell, now serving as my operational headquarters as the newly appointed Vice President of Corporate Integrity at Blackwell Industries. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was literally working in the space where my former husband had planned his crimes, now using it to ensure no other employee would face what his victims had endured. The morning Boston Globe lay open on my desk, featuring a small article buried on page 6, former Blackwell Industries executive sentenced to 23 years in federal prison. Nathan's sentencing had barely registered as news anymore, overshadowed by fresher scandals and more current corporate corruption cases. He had become exactly what he deserved to be: forgotten, irrelevant, a cautionary footnote in business ethics textbooks. Olivia Pearson knocked on my open door, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone whose company had not only survived a major scandal, but emerged stronger than before. "The quarterly harassment training reports," she said, setting down my coffee and gesturing toward the stack of files on my desk. 0 incidents reported across all divisions for the 3rd consecutive quarter. The transformation of Blackwell Industries' workplace culture had been swift and comprehensive. Word of Nathan's prosecution had spread through corporate Boston like wildfire, creating a powerful deterrent effect that extended far beyond our company. Other executives had quietly resigned rather than face similar scrutiny, and industry-wide policies had been strengthened to prevent the kind of systematic abuse Nathan had perpetrated. "The victim advocacy program is expanding to 3 more companies," I told Olivia, reviewing the latest reports from Jessica Bennett's team. "Rachel Harrison has become our most effective trainer. Her insights into recognizing and documenting harassment have been invaluable." Rachel had not only recovered from her traumatic experience, but had transformed it into a mission to protect other women. She now led workshops across New England, teaching employees how to document misconduct and managers how to create genuinely safe workplace environments. Her strength had become an inspiration that extended far beyond Blackwell Industries. The personal transformation had been equally profound. The marriage that had been built on deception and control was officially dissolved, with Nathan signing divorce papers from his federal holding cell. The prenuptial agreement he had insisted upon, designed to protect his assets from a wife he considered intellectually inferior, had become irrelevant when those assets were seized to pay restitution to his victims. My evenings were no longer spent maintaining elaborate facades or documenting crimes in secret. Instead, I found myself building genuine relationships with colleagues who respected my expertise, attending board meetings where my voice carried real authority, and using my platform to advocate for policies that would prevent future abuse. The dual identity that had once been necessary for survival had evolved into authentic leadership. I was fully Sarah Blackwell now, no aliases, no hidden agendas, no carefully constructed performances. The woman who had spent 3 years pretending to be someone else had finally become completely herself, standing at the window overlooking Boston Harbor. I reflected on the lesson that had emerged from this experience. True power isn't about dominating others through fear and intimidation. It's about having the patience to gather evidence, the intelligence to build unassailable cases, and the courage to act decisively when the moment arrives. Nathan Mitchell had believed that power came from his position, his connections, and his ability to silence opposition through threats and bravos. He had learned too late that real power belongs to those who understand that justice is a long-term investment that always pays compound returns. The Blackwell Industries annual gala was approaching again, but this year it would celebrate genuine achievements rather than covering up systematic corruption. The ballroom where Nathan had destroyed his own career would host presentations about our industry-leading harassment prevention programs and our zero-tolerance policies for financial misconduct. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge is simply becoming the person your oppressor never believed you could be, and using that power to ensure they can never hurt anyone else again. The phone on my desk rang another company requesting consultation on implementing comprehensive integrity programs. I answered with the confidence of someone who had learned that the best way to prevent abuse of power is to place that power in the hands of people who understand its true purpose, justice. I had discovered was not a moment of dramatic revelation, it was a sustained commitment to ensuring that truth eventually and inevitably prevails. In the months following Nathan's arrest, the broader implications of his crimes continued to ripple through Boston's corporate community. The FBI's investigation expanded beyond Blackwell Industries, uncovering similar patterns of financial fraud and harassment at 3 other companies where Nathan had previously worked or consulted. His methodology had been consistent throughout his career, targeting financially vulnerable women for harassment, systematically removing employees who questioned financial irregularities, and establishing elaborate embezzlement schemes masked as efficiency improvements. The forensic accounting team I had assembled became a valuable resource for federal investigators, helping them identify similar patterns across multiple organizations. The day of Nathan's sentencing, I sat in the courtroom surrounded by 8 women who had found the courage to testify against him. Each had shared her story of harassment, intimidation, and professional sabotage. Each had faced Nathan directly and described the impact of his actions on her career, her financial security, and her emotional well-being. Rachel Harrison's testimony had been particularly powerful. She described not just what Nathan had done to her, but the systemic failures that had allowed his behavior to continue unchecked for years. The most damaging aspect wasn't the harassment itself, she told the court, her voice steady and clear. It was the institutional response that treated my complaints as a liability rather than a serious concern. When powerful men like Nathan Mitchell are protected by corporate hierarchies, every woman in the organization becomes vulnerable. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s with decades of experience in corporate crime cases, had listened to each testimony with intense focus. When it came time for sentencing, her remarks addressed not just Nathan, but the entire system that had enabled him. Mr. Mitchell, your crimes represent the worst kind of corporate malfeasance, not just theft of funds, but theft of opportunity, dignity, and career advancement from talented professionals who deserve better. Your systematic targeting of women who threaten your fraudulent activities demonstrates a level of calculation that this court finds particularly disturbing. She paused, looking directly at Nathan, who had aged visibly during his 6 months in pretrial detention. This court sentences you to 23 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 18 years. Additionally, you are ordered to pay $4.6 million in restitution to Blackwell Industries and the victims of your harassment. Upon release, You will be prohibited from holding any executive or financial position for the remainder of your life. As Nathan was led away, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction in his suffering, only a deep sense that justice had finally been served. The man who had built his career on making others feel small and powerless was now experiencing that reality himself. But the true transformation wasn't about Nathan's downfall. It was about the positive changes his exposure had catalyzed. Within 6 months of his arrest, 15 major corporations in Boston had implemented new financial oversight protocols and harassment reporting systems based on the model we developed at Blackwell Industries. The Blackwell Standard, as it became known in corporate circles, established clear reporting channels that bypassed traditional hierarchies, anonymous financial whistleblower systems, and mandatory external audits of departments with high turnover rates. Most importantly, it created meaningful consequences for executives who violated ethical standards. During the first year of implementation, harassment reports increased temporarily as victims felt empowered to come forward, then decreased steadily as potential harassers recognized the real consequences of misconduct. Companies that adopted the Blackwell Standard saw improvements in employee retention, particularly among women in technical and financial roles. In my new role as VP of Corporate Integrity, I work closely with Olivia Pearson to ensure that our company led by example. We established a victims advocacy fund that provided financial and legal support to employees who experience harassment, regardless of whether the perpetrator was affiliated with Blackwell Industries. Justice shouldn't depend on where you work, Olivia explained when we announced the initiative. Every person deserves protection from abuse of power, whether they're employed by a multinational corporation or a small family business. The irony wasn't lost on me that Nathan's crimes had ultimately created a powerful force for positive change. His attempt to silence women had given them a stronger voice. His financial fraud had led to more robust corporate oversight. His abuse of power had resulted in meaningful reforms that would protect countless future employees. The annual Blackwell Industries Gala was indeed transformed the following year. Instead of the typical corporate self-congratulation, the event focused on recognizing individuals who had demonstrated exceptional ethical leadership. Rachel Harrison received the first Ethical Courage Award for her role in exposing systematic harassment and helping other victims come forward. As I watched her accept the award, standing confidently on the same spot where Nathan had slapped me a year earlier, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine hope for the future of corporate America. The evening ended with the announcement of a new initiative, the Blackwell Foundation for Workplace Justice, funded with $10 million from the company and dedicated to supporting victims of workplace harassment and financial whistleblowers across industries. Sometimes, I told the assembled guests during my closing remarks, the most important changes come from our darkest moments. What matters isn't the trauma itself, but how we transform it into something meaningful. Looking out at the faces of executives, employees, and advocates who had gathered to support this new vision, I saw none of the superficial networking that had characterized these events in the past. Instead, I saw genuine commitment to creating workplaces where talent could thrive regardless of gender, where financial integrity was valued above short-term gains, and where power was exercised with responsibility rather than impunity. Nathan Mitchell had wanted to build an empire on fear, fraud, and intimidation. Instead, he had inadvertently helped create something far more powerful, a movement for genuine corporate accountability that would long outlast his name or his crimes. As I left the ballroom that night, I paused at the exact spot where I had fallen after Nathan's slap. The marble floor had been polished to a perfect shine, erasing any trace of what had happened there. But the changes that moment had set in motion were indelible, etched into company policies, legal precedents, and the renewed confidence of women who no longer feared speaking truth to power. Sometimes justice takes time. Sometimes it requires years of careful documentation, strategic planning, and patient waiting for the perfect moment to act. But when that moment comes, when truth finally confronts power, the resulting transformation can reach far beyond one woman's victory or one man's downfall. It can change everything.